Hey everyone, it's Mr. Johnson. One of the things that a careful, thoughtful reader does is consider the tone. And what tone means is it's when we look at the things that the author writes and how the author writes in order to determine what ideas the author is trying to convey. This can often get confused with mood. Mood is how the reader reacts or how the reader feels when they're reading a piece of text, whether it's a paragraph or a poem or an entire story. But for now, we're really focusing in on the things that the author actually puts into the writing or how the author structures what he or she is writing in order to convey an idea of how the author feels or how the author wants the reader to feel. Just some examples of tone. These are often very descriptive words, maybe emotions or ideas that can describe the text or describe the author's intention. So you have a lot of these that we might recognize pretty easily, like amused or humorous, or serious, or formal. And there are even a larger range of tone words that we can use to describe a piece of text. Oftentimes, when we're trying to think of what the tone is, thinking of the exact right word can be a bit challenging because we really want to capture the right idea that the author is trying to convey. So, kind of want to pause and think about it a little bit. So let's take a look at a pretty simple example. In fact, it's not even text at all. We're going to compare a couple of images. So we're going to use these two images to look for evidence. The one on the left is an oil painting, Saturn Devouring His Son by Francisco Goya. It's a bit gruesome. And the one on the right is an anonymous work of art that's actually meant to copy Goya's painting, Cookie Monster Devouring His Cookies. So when we look at them, on the surface, they are very similar, but when we start looking at evidence, there are some very clear differences. For example, Francisco Goya's painting is a bit more gruesome because he's actually devouring a human there, it seems. And the one on the right, although still a bit gruesome, Cookie Monster seems to be doing a number on that pastry. It's not bloody gruesome. It's just, Cookie Monster going to town with some jelly coming out there. Another thing too, as far as evidence that separates these two, and this one's relevant for us when we're working on infographics or presentations, is the color palette of the two are very different, even though they both have dark backgrounds. Francisco Goya's oil painting also has a lot of very muddy, earthy tones, dingy, dark tones that makes it very dark and brooding. Meanwhile, Cookie Monsters is a lot more bright and tonal because he's a cartoon. So very different tones that are set with these two pictures, even though they are very similar. Let's take a look at a couple of pieces of text. And the two texts that we're going to use are actually two pieces of text from the Phineas Gage book. Both texts we've read before. The first one I'm actually going to model for you. This is the paragraph where Phineas actually gets the tampering iron straight through his head. So I'm going to go ahead and read through this one, and I'm going to kind of think out loud and kind of show you what my thinking is before you prepare to do your own. So the text says, "There is no argument about what happens next. Something or someone distracts Phineas. Does he hear his name called? Does he spot someone goofing off? Whatever the reason, Phineas turns his head to glance over his right shoulder. The fat end of his tampering iron slips down into the hole and strikes the granite. A spark flies into the exposed blasting powder. Blam! The drill hole acts as a gun barrel. Instead of a bullet, it fires Phineas's rod straight upwards. The iron shrieks through the air and comes down with a loud clang about 30 feet away." So looking through this, I'm there are a lot of words that I would try to consider as far as the tone goes. Um, it's not gruesome because there's no evidence of blood or gore, even though we know this is a bit of a disgusting accident that happens to Phineas. But it's also kind of um, let's see. I would say tense. There is a lot of tension going on here. As a reader, I feel it, but I feel like I can also find some evidence that the author is trying to build tension. It's also exciting, not an exciting in the same way that a roller coaster ride is worth a fun excitement, but tension also brings kind of an anticipatory excitement. We're waiting for something to happen. And I think the author does this a few different ways. One is he builds tension by hinting about what will happen. And he builds details slowly, and then he releases that tension with the blam, uh, the onomatopoeia right there to create a little shot of excitement there. And he also uses a lot of descriptive language, like the iron shrieks through the air and comes down in a loud clang. The other thing that I think is interesting that also builds tension. Tension happens when the reader is waiting for something, but the author withholds and makes the reader wait. And he does this with asking a series of questions before actually getting to the incident, being very detailed and descriptive. But notice he doesn't actually say anything about the tampering iron going through Phineas Gage's head, which also builds tension for the reader. And the tension isn't even released in this paragraph. He's making the reader wait for all the gory details. So now you give it a shot. For this, I would like you to read the text. You might have to pause the video so it doesn't start all over again. And I want you to ask yourself, what is the tone? As you're reading through, you are looking for not how you feel, but evidence of how the author wants you to feel or how the author feels about this. What sort of word or words would you describe for this paragraph? And then go ahead and open up the Google form that's attached to this assignment and carefully read through the pair of questions in there. One will be a multiple choice to select the tone, and the other will be a short response for you to write any evidence or explanation that you think defends that that is the author's intended tone of this paragraph.